You know, without an image, it's hard to understand history. Without history, it's hard to understand a culture and a community. Our conversation now with Ms. Bob Davis, Director and Founder of the Transgender Archive, preserving and talking about that community. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David.
Now, the Transgender Archive, you said before we started, is a project of your retirement. When did you start the archive, and from what career did you retire?
Okay, let's talk about the archive first.
Yeah.
The collection started in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time I had an apartment on my own. You can make of that what you will. And a magazine came out called Female Mimics International. I bought it. I couldn't stop. Since '79, over 30 years, I've been collecting everything I can lay my hands on. I've got photographs, of course, photographs, newsletters, magazines, newspaper clippings, matchbook covers advertising female impersonator shows in New Orleans from the 60s, photographs going back to the mid-1800s. I keep finding things I didn't know were there myself.
So it started as a hobby, and then it became a museum.
A life's work.
Right.
I really didn't realize that, it was. I was writing in the 90s. I started writing articles because I didn't want to hoard this stuff. I think there's this mountain here and some people want to see it. So I started writing articles in community publications and spreading it that way. I started giving lectures on trans history at getaways and conferences. And now I want a place where I can actually put a magazine in somebody's hands and say, yeah, this is what you're talking about. This is what you wanted to know. Right.
So now the collection exists online and digitally, correct? I mean, there's not a place I can walk in and say, hi, give me a ticket to the Transgender Archives.
No, there's not. Many of the items are in the Transgender Digital Archive, which is a project which is seeking to digitize a lot of transgender history. So there's a lot of the stuff I have is up there. Much of it, not all of it. And I'm retiring, to go back to that, I'm retiring from City College.
Right.
I've been there 40 years.
Right. And what do you teach at City College?
Music.
Music. Mostly
music history, guitar. I teach a course called Music and American Culture, which is the most fun I ever have in the classroom. And it's a good course for the students, too.
When did you begin to identify as transgender? And is that how you self-identify?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
For me, it's a very big term.
Yes.
Any transgender, okay. The term goes back, the origin seems to be Virginia Prince in the 60s. And she was trying to distinguish herself from transsexuals. So she changed her gender, but did not have surgery, and only took hormones briefly till her breast got as big as she wanted, then she stopped. So she was transgender, but not transsexual. So I can live with that.
Right. You know, I remember when I was a teenager working in the library in Richmond, Virginia, and getting a book, Everything You Want to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask. And discovering the Kinsey scale. And I was like, my first thought was, you know, good Catholic boy feeling guilty for looking at all the kids, you know, all the boys in the gym. I'm like, well, I guess I'm a Kinsey 6, but then realizing, wow, there seems to be a lot more numbers than 6. I mean, is everything about human sexuality fluid? And I guess my question I'm trying to get at, as a gay man, I have so many transgender friends. It seems to me that the definition of transgender is more fluid than the other 3 letters. Do you think that's fair?
Yes. I do, and I think it's a definition for reasons that are social and I'm not sure of. It keeps evolving. This community is still finding terms and rejecting terms to describe us. In the 90s, we fought like hell for the term tranny. And then 20 years later, young people find that term offensive, where we embraced it. So it's a fluid situation.
All right.
No question.
What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about the trans community from within the LGBT community and from without?
I think, and I'm sure, one thing, it's impossible to make a statement as a transgender person about the transgender community without offending another transgender person. So
That's a slippery slope.
Oh, damn. So you're asking me to take my life in my own hands here, David. I think it has to do with the intersection of sex and gender. I think that's both true of straight community and so, look, Kinsey was talking about sexual sexuality not being only two choices, being a continuum of some kind. A friend of mine said that when she started to transition, gender was an elevator with only two floors. You were male or you're female. But actually, gender has those gradations.
There's some mezzanines in between the floors.
Yeah. So if you took, okay, I got a line here. That's your sexual orientation. That's Kinsey. Then I got your line here, and that's your, gender orientation. So we have a much more complex picture than just a single line. So I think the problem is that there are assumptions made. Gender and sexuality are really not linked. But because, I think, societally, we have certain expectations of what people of a certain sexuality will do, when we see someone portraying that, we say, okay, that must be. But in the transgender world, no, it ain't.
All right. Has it been a challenge presenting as Ms. Bob Davis during your professional career?
Professionally, strangely enough, no.
Well, I mean, you're at City College, not Notre Dame. Right.
I'm not at Notre Dame. I'm not even at the University of San Francisco,
right?
Which is a Jesuit institution that I once considered applying to when the HR website said, if you wanted to work in a Christian atmosphere, and I said, probably not a good fit. So no, I've been very lucky. And make no mistake, I feel personally it has to do with a number of things. One, I'm white. I get a lot of privilege out of that. And I'm not hiding any longer. I dress like this for work. I have for about the past 5 years. I take the BART. I take the bus. I don't go into dark alleys late at night, but I don't compromise very much anymore.
Now, I want to talk about the archives, and we actually have some images here that we want to take a look at. And I believe the first one is an image of your namesake, Louise Lawrence. And when we look at this image, I also want to ask you, how did Louise Lawrence become your namesake? So,
Louise.
Let's take a look right here.
There she is. Louise, in 1942, Louise began living as a woman. She had no hormones. I don't even know if they were available in the 40s. She had no surgery. She worked with groups like the Mattachine Society. She was very influential in bringing transgender, the whole issue of transgender to Kinsey. This is the only photo that's not in the archive. This is at the Kinsey Institute, which is where all of her papers are. But I couldn't leave Louise out. She was at Berkeley, lived in Berkeley, then in San Francisco, and she's a community founder who's relatively unsung, and she's local, so that's why.
Let's see some other people who aren't as well known.
Yes. Now this is from the 20s, and the gosh, I've forgotten what their group name was. The one thing that always strikes me about this, besides the beautiful shawls, is how flattering that flat-chested flapper look was for cross-dressers. I mean, they just look fabulous and flat-chested as hell. This is a San Francisco shot. I got this at the Alameda Flea Market. It cost me either $2 or $5. It was an 8x10. I looked through a pile several inches high. It's the only transgender image. I was able to date it by the beer cans. The beer cans are for Regal Ale, which is a San Francisco company that stopped producing in about 1961.
Yeah, and she looks fabulous. She looks like she could have just stepped out of the Imperial Council, which I went to see this week. Let's keep going.
This is from 1904, from a home talent show that took place in upstate New York. And the girl on the right, there's a lot of acts. It's all men, and there's comedy acts of all kinds. There's blackface. But there's transgender fencers, and there's transgender ping pong players. But she appears more than anyone else, and only in glamour drag. She only wanted to be seen as a woman. Frito-Lay was one of the Sluts A Go-Go group. Yeah, and this Doris Fisher painted and hand-colored this was it 1981, down at the Sound of Music, which is still there on Eddy Street. I think it's on Eddy. T.C. Jones was a female impersonator who made it to Broadway. He started off doing Leonard Selman reviews, New Faces of 52, New Faces of 54. He was so good that he got his own Broadway show. This was it. Then toured. He would do things like Betty Davis reciting lines from Shakespeare's Macbeth as Lady Macbeth. Aren't they happy? I love this couple. It's one of my favorite images. This is from an RSVP cruise from either 78 or 77. And all I know about, and this is a European couple. It could be for some kind of festival. They do have festivals where there's a lot of cross-gender stuff, but don't know any more about it. Got this from, and this was Sister Boom Boom, one of her parties. She's probably the most famous of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence because she...
I met Sister Boom Boom, yeah.
I've met her too. She ran for mayor. And the Bigwood Twins, another vaudeville female impersonator group, Pep and Personality. If you look closely, they're end point.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
This is a great image to end with because the diversity of the collection is really quite something. You said this became kind of an obsession for you, but you said at one point it bordered on hoarding?
Oh, yes, it certainly did. I felt like I have all this stuff and it's not getting out. It's not being seen. It's not doing what it could.
Yeah, we're going to go a little bit long with this interview. We've got about a minute and a half I'd like to take to end this up. I want to ask you, here we are taping in the first half of 2017 with a presidential administration that's just taken steps to really harm, I don't know any other word to use, and endanger the most vulnerable members of our LGBT community, not only members of the trans community, but young people. How does that make you feel, from two perspectives, as a member of the trans community, but also as an educator?
It's offensive as an educator. As an educator, it really is. It's the idea that we're going to stigmatize these young kids. It cuts me to the quick. I don't know what else to say. I think you can see it in my face. This is just appalling. But this is one of the reasons that I want the archive to happen, is because I want people able to go and find. When I was young, it happened. I was young. You couldn't find the information. You go to the library and the book would be checked out and never returned, or there'd be a librarian who was guarding it like...
Yeah, I mean, I had to take the joy of gay sex out and pretend it was stolen to take it home and read it because it was hidden behind the counter. And
this is not just in small towns. This was everywhere. So the idea that I can help young people not have the experience that I had, where they can look at what transgender has meant for people for 150 years, and it took me a long time to figure it out.
Right. Last question. If you had some advice to give a young, not someone who had already transitioned, but someone who was wondering where on that Kinsey scale, or if they needed a whole other scale to help define their gender identity, what advice would you give that young student in North Carolina right now that's worried about where they go to pee? If you're talking about making your identity, I would encourage this person. You really have to look at yourself. There's so many societal pressures that really confuse things, whether it's parents or peers or other transgender people who have established, if you're not doing it the way I'm doing it, it's very hard and takes, I think, to establish this identity. It takes a kind of mature centering that sometimes doesn't come until later in life. Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Ms. Bob Davis about her work for the Transgender Archives. It takes a lot of courage, too, so thank you for that. Next up, our conversation with Ajuan Maintz. We're going to learn about the Queers and Comics Conference. We'll be right back.